I'm really excited to have Paul van der Broek in the studio today. We're actually at the House of Storyware today. Thanks for coming in, Paul. I really appreciate your time.
I'm so happy to be here, Stephen, here in this is a lovely place in Taipei, and I really look forward to our conversation, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, I mean, you've come from an HR background. You took that and turned it into kind of leadership coaching and training. You do some work with IMD, with teams and with individuals.
Yes.
You've written books. You're Dutch and you speak about 15,000 languages as well. You're one of these people that when I look at your CV, I think, what have I been doing with my life? So thank you for spending your time. I know you're on holiday, but thank you for taking the time out to come in the studio and spend some time with us.
Super glad to be here, and so I look forward to your questions and the opportunity to have an interesting conversation with you.
So I think what I wanted to cover is kind of three things today. There's your background, where you've come from, and the kind of the philosophy of leadership that has instilled in you. The second thing is your interest in DEI, and specifically with the women's networks that you've been involved in. And the third thing, of course, is we're going to talk about this beautiful book here, which I love, Lead Like Julius Caesar. Where it takes a historical perspective of leadership and gives it a modern twist. So I think maybe I'll start with a little bit about you.
Sure.
Where have you come? I mean, this journey of working in major corporations as a director and taking that step to come out and being a leadership coach, what made you kind of decide that you would leave the corporate world and then come back and save them?
So, as you said, so I've had a career in corporate in HR for about 15 years, and in that position of HR, you have the opportunity to observe what works and what doesn't work, particularly in the large, complex organization I worked for. And what I observed was that anything a person in a leadership position does brings a result. The only thing is it's not always exactly the result that person had hoped for or planned for. And what I notice is that the difference between the result you want to get and the result you actually get as a leader is often a matter of behavior, communication, in short, human interaction. And I found that fascinating. And so I decided to focus on that, and the best opportunity to do so is to be a consultant specializing in leadership development and working actually with leaders and organizations.
Did anybody think you were crazy coming out of these I would imagine the reason we're stable, right? You're in big corporations, you've got a stable income, and then you come out and set up your own business to go back and advise.
Yes. I had such reactions, and actually after the first year out, that thought crossed my mind as well, because it does take a while before you get yourself up and running as a business. But ultimately, I'm very glad I took that decision, and it was the best for me.
So before we talk about the kind of the leadership philosophy that you've had, and you mentioned a couple of things just now, behavior and communication.
Yeah.
But the process of starting up your own thing. You just mentioned that after a year you were kind of almost concerned yourself. What kind of advice you would give to people who are out there, who are trying to do something, who have a passion or have a desire or have what they think is a need that the world has? What kind of advice would you give to them in terms of setting up and developing a business?
I think what the advice I would give is to focus on the things you're good at, or particularly the things you are interested or passionate about, because when you're interested and passionate about things, it's easier to be good at something. And when you start a business, your first concern is about income, so you take anything that comes around and for which you can send an invoice. but not necessarily lets you do the things you're good at, and you found out that it's difficult to make a sustainable business out of that. But once you've found your way and also able to build up a reputation, then it gets more easy. So I think the advice is to focus on, even if it's difficult in the beginning, to focus on what you're good and passionate about, and develop that, and in that way also make yourself unique and valuable. I think that's what it's about.
I remember Chris Rock, who's an actor, an American comedian. He basically said that, follow your passion so long as your passion's hiring.
Yeah, of course, there's a limit to what you can do, because you see people struggling with ideas, and they're very interested in and going for, but not necessarily gain traction. And there's a point, of course, where you have to say, well, this is not working, let's go for something else. But you should give yourself some time, and as from the beginning, focus on that, what you're good at, so that you really can test it out if it really works.
So we're going to talk about Lead Like Julius Caesar in a little while, but this is not the first book you've written.
Correct.
You've written books on women's leadership.
Yeah.
You've written things on DEI.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of work in DEI. Where did this passion come from?
It comes from my time in the corporate world, really, because what I'm really interested in is how to make organizations more productive. They become more efficient, and that brings you into leadership, because it's an important lever for productivity. But it also lets you look at other things. And then what I noticed, particularly in those large organizations I worked for, is that, to my mind, strangely enough, they use only part of the available talent. Whereas if you want to maximize your productivity, you should get the best people to work for you. And if you only source those people from 50% of the available talent, you're not doing the best you can to become more productive. So I thought, well, why is that? Why are they using one half, which is essentially the male half, and why not underutilize the female half? And so I got looked at what's happening there, and that got me into that space, into essentially to work for gender balance, DEI, if you will, in order to help organizations to become more productive. So it's really from an economic perspective that I'm motivated to work on that.
So I think this is fascinating, because often when you talk about DEI, there's an element of emotion that comes into the conversation. Yeah. And you've come of it. I mean, it may be the right thing to do, but you've come at this from the perspective of, there's an available pool of talent out there that we're not utilizing. You've analyzed it, you've looked at results, and from what I've read in your book, you've realized that organizations that are more successful are more diverse.
Indeed.
That's my lead into you to offer me some more of that kind of information about that.
Yeah, so in principle, but then you get into difficulties, because just to put different people together is not enough, because the reality is the more different people are, the more difficult for them it is initially to work together. So it's much so to gain traction in the short term. It's easier to put teams together which are homogeneous. But if a diverse team learns how to work together, and there is an important role for whoever is leading the team or the organization, then this additional benefits comes into play, and teams and organizations become more productive, because they really then leverage this difference in creativity, in ideas, in way of working, and so forth.
Because I see this often with leaders, especially and I'm not complaining about Taiwan, but I mean, in terms of DEI, we're very advanced in certain ways, but in other ways, maybe, because we're a lot of SMEs. We're 85% SMEs in Taiwan. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes, though, SMEs are kind of single person, single thought led. And so you have a leader who is, this is the way it's got to be done, and they're often startups, and you need that passion, you need that kind of approach. But what I hear from some of the SMEs that I talk to are, DEI is more difficult and it's not worth it because, especially like hiring people from other countries or other cultures or something like that, or, people with different thoughts just get in the way of the kind of the direction. What would you say to people like that when they're, if people are responding in that way?
Well, the interesting thing is, and I don't know whether that's the case in Taiwan, but certainly the case in Europe and in certain countries where SMEs are very important, or family businesses in general, like in Italy or in Germany, you see that there, when it comes to gender balance at least, they are pretty good with regard to the members of the family. So once, let's say, they have no problem with a woman leader, on the contrary, as long as she's a member of the family. Yeah? And but that is also explained in a way because in that family configuration, while growing up, they've also learned to work together. And these difficulties in cooperation between different people have been resolved by that living together over time in those situations, and that's how it works. Now, when it works with regard to external people who are different from different countries, for example, integrating them into an SME, I would say to them, look what they bring to you, and make sure that those people are put in a place where they can actually add that value. Because I think the most important thing to reduce resistance against diversity, if people see, well, there's a value that this person brings. Yeah. If you have a Taiwanese SME, for example, who wants to, export to Germany, it would be helpful for them to have a German speaker.
You would imagine.
Yeah. And so that added value can then be used to integrate that person in a way into that different culture.
So I think this is an incredibly practical response to DEI. Because often, as I said at the beginning, often people put this emotional thing. They think of it's more of being like rights, that people have the right to work or something like that. But actually what you're saying is that DEI adds value because you are bringing in additional value to what you already have.
Yeah. And therefore also when you, as often happens, they have an all-male team and they bring in a woman and it's sold as, okay, this is the thing to do. We need to be equal opportunity and therefore have now a woman. And that puts both the team and the woman at a disadvantage because there is the idea, okay, well, she's there because of the fact that she's a woman, not because of her competencies. Whereas if you would say, look, we're bringing in a woman, and purposely so not a man, because we have too many men anyway, and we need a woman in order to have a more diverse team and therefore a better team, that's a totally different sales pitch and more realistic as well. And it makes more, okay, then it makes sense, It's,
I've heard, and again, I spent some time at IMD, and that's our connection, that's how we connected. I did the kind of the OWP program, and you reached out to me as an alumni, so thank you for doing that. When I was there, I remember looking at a case study which was about a traditional paper company, and I think it's something that's often kind of quoted through some of the professors at IMD. And it was basically their company, it was they were a packaging company. It was going downhill. I wish I could remember the name, and I'll put the name in the link. But they were struggling, many, many years struggling, and then the management made a decision to bring in, they looked at their board, they looked at their management and saw that everybody looked exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right? And they're all of a certain age, and they're all of a certain background. And they realized that hang on, what's going on here? We've got all these people and we're failing. So they brought in 40 years younger people into the company who suddenly told them all about kind of, upcycling, recycling, the way the world was concerned about certain things. And they realized that the market had changed, but they hadn't.
Exactly.
And I think it's a wonderful story about how DEI can actually help a company to turn around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, you also do, you've written a play.
Indeed.
About DEI. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's based on, or at least inspiration comes from the other book I've written about 4 successful women leaders, historic women leaders or queens, and with 2 female artists. I used that as an inspiration to write play about women leadership. So it's a 25-minute play, and it showcases 4 different women leaders in different situations with both their difficulties as well as their successes. And in rapid succession, it showcases a number of very realistic situations junior, more senior women leaders come across when they're working in an organization.
And do you find that this play, putting this on, has this helped to get the message of DEI in a more effective way?
Definitely. So it's not a play which brings about a certain message about this, it should be done this, or organizations should do this, that, or the other. It just showcases reality. And we've played it several times in organizations and in universities, always for a mixed audience, so men and women, and then followed by discussion or workshop and so forth. And it works very well because people recognize either themselves or a colleague or a situation in their organization, and it gives them a great opportunity to talk from that reality about, okay, what's going on in our place, or what can we do differently and better in order to make our organization better without necessarily advantaging or disadvantaging either gender. And it also leads to a better understanding and cooperation between men and women, apart from the fact that it helps women leaders to in the development and see how they can become better in the organization.
And you've been touring this program?
Yes, yeah.
Wow. Any chance you can come out to Taiwan?
Yeah, would love to. I mean, if there's a place for us here to help organizations with a gender balance, absolutely.
Okay, you all heard that. There may be a chance to come out to Taiwan. So if you're interested, let me know. Just send me a message. The details are down below. We'll find out. We'll put some links on here and maybe some some information
absolutely.
about this show.
Yeah.
I want to move on to your book now because this book is fascinating. The DEI stuff is super interesting, and I can see there's a definite kind of progression from where you were to kind of what you've been helping the community to learn, helping the business community to get better at. The historical stuff is just something that's fascinating to me, that you've had a look at, because often I think with business, people look at what is new. You know, what is the latest thing? There's like a business magazine or there's like the latest kind of theory on leadership, and suddenly everything has to be a certain way. You know, let's all change and do it this way, you know. It's all agile thinking now. We throw out all our SOPs and just constantly, reinvent the wheel as we go through. That's what the philosophy is now. But you're looking at historical figures. So in the book, Lead Like Julius Caesar. I mean, Julius Caesar, it's how many years ago are we talking now?
Well, a bit more than 2000.
Right,
yeah.
right. I mean, I did Greek and Roman history in high school, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. But I never thought about looking at that period of time for my leadership development. Where did this come from?
So it comes from my original studies. So I'm a historian by background, studied ancient history, did a PhD already about leadership in ancient Rome, including Julius Caesar, who was one of the leaders I looked at that time. So that interest about history and leadership has been with me from the beginning of my studies. And I've always kept on that every once in a while, going back to it, using it sometimes also in my work as a coach or development professional. And
how do people respond when you say, look, by the way, here's some lessons from Julius Caesar?
Well, generally positively, because the thing is, and that's why all the reasons to choose Julius Caesar, because yes, because he's very known. There's a lot written about him, and you can ask yourself why should you add something to that? But because he's so iconic, and we still refer to him. I mean, if you talk about the Tsar, even the U.S. government nowadays uses Tsar, which is Caesar's name. Used in a Russian fashion, and it refers to him as a leader, so that's not for nothing that his last name became a title, or Kaiser in German, and so forth. So that is one of the many reasons why Caesar is still present today and being referred to, and that's one of the reasons why it's worthwhile to look at him. Plus the fact that, we do know a lot about him, unlike other periods of figures in history, so there is the opportunity to look at him in a way as I look in my coaching practice at current and modern leaders. because the data are there, so you can use them.
No, I really enjoyed the book. Thank you for this, and we'll make some copies available in Taiwan at a special discount arranged by Paul. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. I broke it down in kind of 5 areas for me. Feel free to correct me, but
Yeah.
I've got leadership development. So he came from, essentially he was what they call like high potential youth, right? And then he obviously ended up being the Caesar. What are the lessons that we get from this period, this kind of development from, classic high potential youth into being the absolute leader of the ancient world?
Yeah. So Caesar is an example of building a career through a structured career system, as you have in big organizations, whether it's public or private. Those structured career systems used to be much more prevalent in the past. I mean, it's the one I learned to work with when I developed people's careers in Royal Dutch Shell, where I started my career in HR. It's gotten out of fashion with organization. I think Caesar shows that actually there's some use in having such a structured system, which gives talent the opportunity to move from one position to the other with increasing responsibilities and developing their competencies. Having said that, it's also the other example that Caesar showed is that a person, high potential is not enough. You also should actively use that high potential in that structured career to get the experiences that are valuable to you and that help you learn. And I think for young leaders, one of the things which really came out of that, and I would put forward as a thing to bear in mind, that when you start your career, so you first, second, or third job, make sure that you get into a position where you can actually do something operational, deliver, that you can get results. Because there is a tendency to put younger talent often in, let's say, staff positions where they do analysis and all very useful and interesting stuff, and they can build a network, but this operational part is often missing, and it's really there that you can, on the one hand, find out what you're good at and not so good at and need to develop, and secondly, where you can also gain visibility to more senior people, because at the end of the day, organizations are interested in what you're able to deliver, not necessarily what you're able to think of.
How would someone who's in that position, imagine you're in a company, you're Julius Caesar, you're not in a position that you want to be in. You don't have this visibility that you talk about.
Yeah.
You're not in a position where you're accountable for anything. You have nothing that you have to deliver. You're basically photocopying.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would be your advice to people that you would work with and to develop that?
Two things. One is get to know the organization better, start talking to people, see what's out there, and see how the organization works when it comes to assigning jobs. Some organizations are very centralized, where HR decides who goes where. Other organizations are a bit more individual, and you need to find your own way. Either or, find a way in your organization that gives you the opportunity to move to a more operational job. Should that be more difficult or not possible, then see what you can do within your current job to be more operational and actually deliver stuff. And see what you can do with those photocopies you're making and turn it into something more tangible.
Make paper airplanes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or do something design.
Yeah. or read what's on the copies and see whether there's something there.
Right, that's a great opportunity actually to learn, right?
Yeah.
If you're photocopying blindly, but you haven't actually looked at what you're photocopying, you're not learning, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. But taking the initiative for your own career is very important.
Yeah. At what point, and you don't have to answer this necessarily, but at what point would you say, this is not the organization for me? Is there a point where, if you've tried a couple of these techniques, you've tried to learn something, if you're photocopying blank pieces of paper, if you're just, processing things that don't have any meaning and value and stuff, at what point and how long do you think people should kind of put up with that?
Well, I think when you are at the junior level, so before you turn 30 or something like that, probably after a year you should know. Later it can take a bit longer. But it's very important also to realize what is going on, because there's also sometimes younger people can fall in the tendency to blame everybody else except for themselves. So it's also important to develop your self-awareness and see, okay, what have I done or what have I not done or what I could do differently in this situation before actually deciding, well, it's not me, it's the job, and therefore I need to leave.
I personally, this is a personal view, I think that self-awareness is the single most important attribute for any leader. I don't know if you agree with that.
No, absolutely. And to come back to Caesar, that's ultimately what led to the tragic end and sudden death of his career.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah. So and Caesar also shows that you can get very, very far without necessarily having that self-awareness that you need. But there's a point where it comes back to haunt you.
What's also interesting, I think, about Caesar is this kind of, and again, if I'm not quoting it correctly, feel free to correct me, but this kind of follower and leader dynamic that developed. Yeah. It's very much a kind of a cult of Caesar that developed, and you express that quite strongly.
Yeah. So in that respect, Caesar developed a very loyal following, particularly, and that's where D&I comes in. Diversity, using different talent was one of his strengths. He gave people of a lower social status opportunities others didn't, and therefore he got access to that talent which others didn't. But at the same time, these individuals were loyal to Caesar because they were dependent of him for their careers. As a result, and that's with any follower, the feedback they give, the advice they give is biased because there's a self-interest built into that. And that's something which Caesar didn't capture. And therefore he was pushed into situations by that self-interest from his followers, which perhaps if he would have had a more objective perspective would not have done or done differently. And that also goes on to show even if you're very powerful as a leader, you're perhaps not as independent in your decision-making as you may think.
How do you avoid this trap? And I've been a CEO. I've run reasonably large organizations. You've been involved in huge corporates. How do you avoid that trap of just, you build a community around you who support you. They all tend to agree with you because they're basically, you pay the checks and, How do you, as a leader, how do you avoid falling into that trap? How do you avoid the Caesar trap?
To become aware, first of all, that the feedback and your advice you get, how well-meaning it may be and how well founded it may be, is at the end of the day subjective. Any feedback you get is subjective, and to be aware of that and to find, okay, what would be the subjectivity behind the specific feedback I'm getting, and does that potentially lead me on a wrong path? So that's one thing. And the second thing is to get, again, diverse feedback. Diversity, again, comes in. Different perspective. Have a court jester who tells you the opposite of what everybody else is telling you. And then from that, come up to a better decision.
Yeah, I think this idea, the court jester system, I think is amazing. I think it's fantastic. Someone who their sole job is basically to ridicule you. And make you see what's kind of... And I think any leader who is beyond being ridiculed, I think has some serious problems.
Yeah.
That's one of my lessons I got from this book.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think one of the things that you actually admire Caesar for, I get from this book, is his ability to make these strategic decisions.
Yeah.
Obviously, the achievements during his time were phenomenal. Whether you support them or not, whether you support... And I don't want to get too political here, but, they invaded a few countries.
Yes.
They went out, they spread the doctrine of Rome, etc., all around the world. And they brought value to the places they went to, in many cases, right? But these strategic decisions that he made, you obviously admire his ability to make those. Whether the results are the right results or not, from a personal point of view, is a whole different question.
Yeah.
But you admire this, and this is something that he's obviously very, very good at.
Yeah.
How do you think he came to have this kind of, was this a natural, innate ability? He learned it. He learned it from people around him. He had good people around him. How do you think this whole thing developed?
Well, he did, to pick up on your last point, he had a knack for not only recruiting diverse talent, but also diverse talent in the sense of having a number of specialists around him who helped him, whether that's with technology or with his army or legal things, so forth, or logistics. So he was recognized that ability of specialists and used that expertise to come to better decisions, also strategically. Secondly, with regard to himself, apart from innate talent and being smart and having a good education, I think these early career experiences helped him because, and that's also something which is worth adding from the point of view of early career development, is that he took risks. And through those risks, he discovered things, what works or what doesn't work, what he is able to do, not able to do. And I think these risk-taking early on are important because, well, there is less at stake if you're in a more junior position. You can allow yourself to get things wrong, to make mistakes, to take risks. If you're 20 years down the road in your career, it's different at a more senior level. I think that also helps you to find, okay, at a smaller level, what works, doesn't work, and to use that to its advantage later on.
So you feel like I'm hearing from you, you're saying we need to take the risks early on in our career.
Yes.
To learn from those.
Yes.
And this is partly what Julius Caesar has obviously done.
Yeah.
He's made some mistakes, and he's learned from those, and he's got better from them.
Yeah.
Okay. As you get older, as you get longer in your career, the mistakes hopefully would become less. Do you still take risks?
Definitely.
I mean, you left a career,
Yeah.
a fairly stable career, and moved out on your own. That's a risk.
Absolutely. And so, yes, you cannot avoid taking risks. On the contrary, I mean, risks are connected to opportunities, so you need to take risks. But the thing is, when you learn from early on what it means to take a risk and what type of analysis perhaps you should do beforehand, before deciding on do I do this or not, it helps you later on to do similar analysis when there's more at stake. But also the opportunities are obviously bigger.
So leadership style. I mean, every leader has a different style. And you delve into kind of Julius Caesar's style.
Yeah.
How would you characterize his style? And I'm not going to make you compare him to a single leader that's in the world today, but how would you characterize his style in terms of our common modern geopolitical situation?
Yeah. So he was very connected to the people working for him, his followers. So he was very committed to deliver on the promises he had towards them, and that helped him to gain also people who were willing to work for him and were very highly motivated. He had a reasonable ability to find the right people to work for him. And I think his values were important. He was a forgiving person.
That's interesting.
One mistake is okay. Second mistake, mistake was quite unforgiving. But he allowed people to, the first time around, to make a mistake or even to fight against him. But once the fighting was over, he was happy to forget and forgive. And that that also gained him an important, first of all, a leadership brand. He was known for that, and also gained him a following. Other than that, I think it's important to recognize that he was somewhat aloof. He was not a person who found it easy to express his emotions and his feelings. And that created a certain distance at the same time with not only the people working for him, but also generally his stakeholders and network.
Do you think that the aloofness, is that an advantage or a disadvantage?
I think it's a disadvantage.
Okay.
Yeah, because it would have helped Caesar if he would have been more explaining about what he thought and felt for people to understand really where he was going at and so forth. Yeah.
But there is a philosophy of leadership where the leader often this is why there are kind of CEO kind of groups to get together where people can share experiences and people come to IMD to learn and have coaches and leadership, because leadership is is of its very nature quite lonely sometimes.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And is this aloofness? I mean, do you have to be a separate person to be a good leader?
Well, you have to be clear about the difference, particularly in roles. It's not about becoming buddy-buddy with everybody. But nevertheless, and that brings back to something which is quite modern nowadays. It's trendy, but it's also true. There's authenticity. So, I mean, you are a person as a leader, and the comparison I often make is that, with the opera, the opera is something which is always, the essence is always the same. The music is the same, the text is the same, the rules are the same, so forth. However, when you go to see the same opera a few times with different people singing and acting, you get totally different experiences, because the person impersonating the role with their voice and the way they act is quite different. And it's the same with leadership. You put your person in there, and therefore it's important to show that person by indeed also giving people an indication of what you feel and think. It's not about blurring out everything that's come up in you, but you should do that in a constructive and controlled way, but nevertheless support people to know what you feel and think, whether you're happy or not and why.
I think this whole thing about what you share, when you share it.
And how you share it.
Right. There should be, I know there are classes in this, but I get this question all the time from people that I work with, well, people want me to be authentic. I was authentic. And you got to be, so there's, I think with presentations, I always tell people that you want to be just like you and authentic, but maybe 10 times bigger when you're presenting. If you want to be a leader, you almost have to be authentic, but maybe 10 times less. You don't want to be sharing, you can't share everything that's going on in your life. Your dog is at home, your dog is sick. Is this an appropriate thing to share in a business meeting? Maybe not, But it's authentic. I think people get confused by this kind of authenticness.
Yeah. And with that respect, it's important to find the right balance between TLI and TMI. Too little information, too much information.
Right. I think we've moved off a little bit from Caesar here, but this is an interesting topic for me, because this idea of what you share, how much you share. And the question is, I always think of this thing like, what's in it for me? So if you're self-aware, you can put yourself in a position where, is this information actually relevant, important, influential for the person that you're actually speaking to? And I think that's maybe a question that leaders have to ask themselves. You could be authentic, but, are you sharing something that, I just got a raise when you're firing people is not the way to go.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, it's important that you are, and that's also something I see leaders often struggling with, is role understanding. Do I know what it is to be in a leadership position? Do I understand what that means? And do I understand that whatever I do, whatever I say, is being seen and interpreted from the perspective of that I have this position, particularly towards direct reports.
Right.
It's my boss telling me he is happy or unhappy. It's not Susan or Joe doing that,
Right.
And that's one should be very aware of that. Yeah.
This is I see this trap with a lot of leaders who want to be liked.
Yes.
And they, the staff love my jokes. Okay, I always ask them, do you sign the checks?
Yeah.
Are you the one that sends out the salaries? Yeah. Well, yeah. They'll always find your jokes funny.
Yeah.
Ask yourself whether it's appropriate to be telling jokes. Yeah, that's all.
Exactly. And the opposite happens too, where people say, well, I am the leader here, so I should absolutely not say anything or share anything. I should,
my job is
should be formal and,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I think one of the things that, as we kind of come to, not the end of the book, but the end of my kind of summation of the book, is that one of the things about Caesar is really this idea of being a cautionary tale.
Yes.
You obviously, I feel like you have a genuine liking for him. You know, I can feel the kind of your love for Caesar. And I can also feel that you really, I don't want to say disappointed, but you feel for him in the mistakes that he made towards the end, or maybe they were all the way through his career, but he you know, they resulted in, I mean, it's not a great way that his life ended.
Yeah.
What can we learn from the cautionary tale of Julius Caesar as a modern leader?
There are, of course, several things, but one of the things which would say, first of all, based on what you just said, is that was it what ultimately brought his career to an end? So certainly, was it something which happened only then, or was it something was with him throughout his career? Actually, it's the latter. Yeah. So and that's a very difficult point because when I work with leaders, I often notice that they tend to focus on the weaknesses and in their development, and I'm saying, well, that's not always the best thing to do, because sometimes, and Caesar to some extent shows that too, you get better return on investment of your development if you work to use your strengths more or in different ways, rather than at working at something which, whatever you do, you're never going to be good at. But there's a comma after that, and after that comma comes, however, there may be some weaknesses which are at a level where they may sabotage you sooner or later. And that's what happened to Caesar, where there's this one particular competency which has to do with emotional intelligence towards groups, is something which he missed. He was unable to sense what was going on under the surface with larger groups, as opposed to with individuals, and therefore unable to influence and therefore unable to pick up dissatisfaction. And that happened a few times through his career, and always because the guy was very, very good, was able to come back and turn things around for the better, until that last time when he was unable to do so. But the same pattern happened over time, and therefore it's very important for leaders to look at, okay, the self-awareness against, okay, what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and what could the consequences be, and where should I focus on more on my strengths or more on a particular weakness. And there's no one size fits all, so I can't give enough, do 1, 2, 3, and then you're done. No, it's very individual, both from the point of view of the leader, their set of competencies, their capabilities, and the situation, the context, the organization they're working in.
So I think one of I always ask myself a question, is how big is big enough?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think with the empire, Julius Caesar and the development of the empire, I mean, one of those questions has to be asked is, at what point could he have stopped, or should he have stopped, and would it have been enough? You know, I remember Dr. Suzuki in the 80s was talking about the economics of actually reduction.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to keep growing forever. We need to look at, maybe our goals should be to reduce.
Yeah.
You know, did Caesar just simply overreach and try to become too big?
The interesting thing about Caesar in that regard is that it has to do very much with his personality. So he was driven to bring about good results and to be admired for that. And that was very much in line with the meritocratic value system of the organization he worked for, the Roman Republic, and the society he was part of. And these drivers were essentially imbued by his family. He was driven to not only to do good for the Republic, the organization he worked with, but also to better his family, which had lost status, and he was there, followed in his father's footsteps, as well as supported very much strongly pushed by his mother to bring that family back to the place at the top where it belonged. And so therefore, there was no stop to that. He had to continue to go on and go on and go on and do that. And if he would have developed also perhaps some very personal objectives next to those, he may have said, well, okay, I've achieved this, now I'm going for that, and I can perhaps retire, and let other people take over. But that he missed, so he was unstoppable because he was driven by these external motivations as opposed to perhaps what he could have done for himself as a person.
I feel like this is a really good lesson for founders,
Yes.
right? It's the founder syndrome, isn't it?
Yes, it is,
The
absolutely.
people who build something and then don't know when to
Yeah,
let it go.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
don't know when to enjoy the fruits of their labours.
Exactly, yeah.
Don't know when to. I mean, retiring is I think retiring is a terrible word. I don't think people retire now, but to pull back, do other things, adjust what you do, pass on. Right?
Indeed. Yeah.
Do you think was there an opportunity or a moment where you thought that Caesar, you're such an expert on this, was there a moment when he could have passed on the baton to somebody else?
Yeah, in a way, he was. Well, Caesar did not believe in, unlike what many people think, that it should be one person that should take over him. He very much believed in the system of a republic, which was a collective leadership. So he would have passed on to the institution and to the leaders in that institution who would take on from him. And he was working also on reforming that system so that would work better. So that could have worked, but he was, also in a relentless drive for achievement. He was also impatient, and that stopped him from thinking about, okay, what can I do now to develop some people around me to take over from me, as opposed to me doing everything myself, which was another of his flaws, to be too much doing himself as opposed to giving a broader delegation to people around him.
But I feel like, as with a lot of companies, there's sort of there's a conflict between what I read in your book as being kind of decentralizing.
Yeah.
Kind of, maybe that's the nature of being too big, right? So government ended up being a little bit decentralized. So there are people who had positions of power and kind of spheres of influence, but also wanting to hold control over everything. These are conflicting, and yet somehow they're both problems for him.
Yes, and it's a very difficult balance to find, and to develop my answer a bit further on your question. I think Caesar was in that last period. He was also finally finding real joy in developing people, particularly high potentials like himself. And there were two particular. One was Cleopatra, and the other was Octavian, which ultimately became his successor, but it took a few civil wars to get there. He really enjoyed developing them into successful leaders. And I think there he set himself on a path which, having given that more attention, perhaps he could have said, well, okay, now I have developed a number of people around me who, within the institutional framework, can take over from me and take it further. And I can let go more of that. Yeah.
So is there one central lesson that you would want to share with people as being kind of, here's Julius Caesar, here's what you should know. This is the one thing that you should take away from this.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it really comes down to having the complete picture and information, and the way to get that is through feedback. And that means that you really have to take an active role as a leader to get feedback. You will get feedback, but it's not necessarily the complete picture. So you really have to be very active in finding that information from different people, again, the diversity aspect, but also further down in the organization, as opposed to just the people who you happen to share an office building with.
So, Paul, I've really enjoyed the conversation today. Obviously, our time has to be limited. We can't go on forever. But I just wanted, if I could, to kind of share some of the things that I've got out of today.
Please.
I love your background. You've worked in international corporations, and then you took a risk and went out and did something on your own, but you had the skills, you had the knowledge, and you had the passion to carry that through. And I think that's a great lesson. Your passions obviously led you to developing work and books and plays in the DEI area. DEI, D&I, these are all the same things. Some people call it EDI. We'll put some links down below so that you know what we're talking about. But it's basically the diversity, equality, and inclusion space. Very important to you. Your message for that is that it's not really about people's rights or doing what is right. It is really about the diversity adding value to the organisation as a whole.
Yes.
Some of your lessons later on from Caesar, I think, really bear that out, where if Caesar had included more people, more diverse opinions in his later management, certainly, that he may not have come to the sticky end that he came to, right? And the diversity should bring new ideas, new values, new thoughts. Shouldn't just detract from what is going on. There still needs to be a vision, but bringing in new ideas and new thoughts on something can add value. I think that's a great lesson for us. We talked a little bit about leadership development. And the lesson from Caesar that I'm getting from you is that don't be afraid of following for want of a better term, corporate path, a systematic learning opportunity that you can get to be better at what you do.
Yeah.
We don't have to all be startup founders at the age of 14, right?
Yeah.
For some of us, we need to learn some things. It's taken me until the age of 50-something for me to learn certain things and be able to go out on my own and do my own thing. And that's, the world has taught me that. The world has taught me to be better at what I want to do. His ability to learn from setbacks, to go out there, take risks, learn from those and become better for that, really led to his being a great leader.
Yeah.
Certainly in the early stages, right? But the advice for you about being inside corporates is to get visibility. Find things that you can do and add value to and develop your visibility with teams. And give yourself a bit of time.
Yes.
Be patient, right? It doesn't have to be today or tomorrow. Certainly give yourself at least a year in an organisation to work through that. We talked about the kind of follower-leader dynamic. This is developing a base that's going to support you, but don't be slavish. Don't be enslaved to that base. You need to have your supporters, but also keep that diversity of opinion. Keep people around you that can help you. Be skeptical of advice. Right?
Yes.
Ask the question, why are people telling me this particular thing?
Yeah.
Strategic decision making. Through the book, I get this as being something that's very important, something that you value highly. And we can take lessons from Caesar and how he made great strategic decisions and was very successful in that. Up until, I would argue, the end. Right? And I'm not spoiling the movie here. We all know how it ends. Right? But he recruited specialists in areas that he needed, which is something I think we all need to learn to do. Reach out to find talent. We are not, all of us, great marketers, great salespeople, great managers, great operations people, great accountants. We need to have people who are good and skilled at these various different things. And again, this learning through failure as he went through. He constantly, the impression I get from you and from the book is that he reinvented himself. Learned from the failure, got better at it. Again, until the end.
Until the end, yeah, that was one.
Right?
Yeah.
His personality, he developed his own leadership style, and where he maybe had some weaknesses were being a little bit too aloof, being apart from his people. But he had a kind of a follower, he had a cult, he had a leadership style, he had a personality that people wanted to follow. Ultimately, at the end, when he'd raised people up to be equal to him, they wanted more from him than he was able to deliver.
Yeah.
And that's where that kind of separation of person from position really he struggled with that, to connect to the people around him. And obviously the cautionary lessons, which I get from the Caesar story. Focus on your strengths, but don't allow your weaknesses to be so strong that they will sabotage your entire thing. So if you have an obvious weakness, it makes you weak.
Yeah, and particularly if it's a weakness which brings about a failure or difficulty a second or third time.
Right, right. And you talked also about, which is interesting, where he was very forgiving of a first mistake.
Yeah.
And extremely unforgiving
Yes.
of a second mistake.
Yeah.
That may be a little bit quick in my book. I usually give 2 or 3 times. but certainly allow mistakes, and allow people to come to you and tell you about those mistakes, and we can all learn from that.
Yeah.
And the last thing I kind of took out of all this was this really the founder's syndrome, where he was, I own this, I do this, I'm in charge of all of this. I do this, I own this, I'm in charge of all of this, but not allowing, or at least not quickly enough, for the next generation or the next group of leaders to take over and have positions of authority.
Yeah.
And I see that as being kind of really the biggest reason for his downfall.
Yeah.
As we kind of round this up, is there a final lesson that you'd just like to share with everyone?
Well, just based on the last thing you said, I think with this aloofness, as I said, he didn't explain enough, neither his feelings nor his thoughts. I'm doing this because I want to go in that direction, and therefore, and that because of that, people filled in their own gaps. And what he did could be easily and was interpreted by some until this day as saying, well, the things he was doing was in the direction of him becoming to be dictator in the modern sense of the term, or king and so forth, which was not the case. He was restructuring and had other ideas, but he did not explain it. So people filled in the gaps that, yeah, he must be doing this because that's what I see. Without knowing what's really behind there. So this communication about telling people, again, what you feel and what you think, in a constructive way, realizing what position you have, that you're speaking from your role as opposed from your person, but nevertheless you need to tell it to people and explain.
Leaders need to communicate.
Yeah.
Tell people what you're doing, tell people why you're doing it.
Yeah, and then also what's in it for them.
Paul van der Broek, thank you very much for your time today. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was a pleasure to be here, and thanks again for having me here on your show.
And we're out.
Good.